Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Bar. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Patrick Spychalski. He is the co founder of the Kiln, which, if you're on LinkedIn or if you're anywhere in go to market, you've definitely heard of. Patrick, thanks so much for doing this today. How are you?
Doing well, and I appreciate you having me on.
Now, I think you're the fastest guest we've ever had in the Tiki Bar. But the question that I always ask first is, what did you want to be when you were a little kid? Was there Olympic dreams, or am I projecting?
I would say there's definitely some, although it's pretty evident even at a young age whether you'd actually make the Olympics or not. So, like, while I was talented from a young age in running, I was always pretty aware that there were people significantly faster than me. So, funnily enough, I still wanted to be a business owner even when I was younger. I think just because my dad was. But as I started running, I was like, hey, there's always a 1% chance I make it. So I guess it was like a goal in the back.
Okay, but you had that entrepreneurial bug when you were a kid already?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my dad's run a business for most of my, let's say, life that I remember from childhood to now, and he was always around, like, just at home when I was a child, like, able to work from home, and I was always like, this is so cool. All my other friends' parents are gone at some office or something. Of course, this is very like pre remote work, so it was always just cool having him around. It was always cool seeing him run his own business, and he didn't have to put on a suit every day. He just got to hang out in his office and work. And I always kind of aspired to have a similar situation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have three little kids, and I think about if I had to go to an office, like what I would miss, and I just don't think I could go back.
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like I don't know. I was definitely not envious of my friends whose parents had to be in offices all the time, and it was always nice to, like, if I had a question or if I need to ask my dad for some worldly advice or something, he was just right downstairs, which was really
Yeah, he's
convenient.
present. I love that. What ended up being your first paying job?
I worked at Regal Cinemas, so I worked at the movie theater. I was selling tickets, filling popcorn. I remember I got the job right as Finding Dory came out, and it was just an absolute nightmare. Like, it was just like lines out the door every day, pretty terrible. But I think I was making like $7 an hour, and by the end of the summer, I felt like I had accrued a fair amount of money, at least for the year, which was I felt like exciting at the very least.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then you go to Villanova. Did you go to Villanova specifically for track?
I did, yeah. So most of my collegiate decision was centered around track. I'd been recruited by a fair amount of the schools out there. And so a lot of my college decision was just going on official visits to these schools, hearing the coaches out and like their general pitch, and then just picking the one that I felt would be like A, the best running school, would be the best like degree. So when I was done with running, I could hopefully get a decent job somewhere. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind. Like, again, I'm probably not going to go to the Olympics, so let's pick a school that I would have otherwise probably not gotten into, and use like the running thing as just a general advantage.
That may be your first consumer experience as part of a big sales pitch, perhaps. I suppose you're probably getting all those letters and things like that that elite athletes get in the direct mail.
Yeah, exactly. And it was super exciting, honestly, like getting random like letters, like physical letters from collegiate coaches being like, "Hey, we'd love to like have you at the school, come on an official visit." And then I was able to kind of just pick the ones that I felt were the best options. And then I went on, a couple official visits, and Villanova. I had a talk with the coach there, and I was like immediately like, I want to run with this guy. He's the best. And then I signed pretty shortly after.
Clay tables always seem to just permeate their way into conversation. I think we just thought of one for the various Division One coaches out there sending direct mail campaigns.
Honestly, yeah, not a bad idea.
So, what did you actually study in Villanova?
I studied marketing. So yeah, I just felt like it was the most like straightforward business degree I could get. And I wanted to be at the business school there. And so I kind of just randomly selected it. It felt like a easy enough one to do with the running at the same time.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I was a marketing major because it was the easiest thing to do, except I didn't have the incredible running achievements, but that's okay. Um, Now, was Unique Market the first business that you started?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I probably like mowed some lawns and stuff prior to that, but Unique Market was a permutation of a vintage store I had started before that. So I'd been selling vintage and designer clothing since I was 15. My parents were like, "Hey, listen, like we don't want to keep buying your clothes for you, so like just start going to the thrift store and like buying clothes yourself. Like, there's clothes at the thrift store. Like, go find your own outfits. Like, we're not paying for your clothes anymore." I was like, okay, like I have no money, so thrift store is the only option. And so I would go, and I quickly realized that a ton of the stuff in the thrift stores were like worth significantly more money than they were charging. Like, I would go to Goodwill and there'd be this incredible jacket for like $4, and I'd be like,
Mm.
I could definitely sell this. And again, like I had no money, and at the time I had no job, and so I was like, okay, if I can start flipping stuff to people in my school, I can, probably make a decent amount of money or even just enough money to like get by as a 15-year-old. So I started buying clothes from the various Goodwills around Charleston, and I started like an Instagram account, and I like told all my friends to go follow it. And then I started flipping clothes to just people at my school. So I would post once a week and have this big drop. People would buy stuff, and then I'd come to school like the next week, like on the Monday or the Tuesday of that next week. And I had this giant duffel bag full of vintage clothing, and I would just walk around school delivering the clothing and selling it out to people. And I was doing that for a while. So it eventually kind of snowballed, and I started having these like wholesale suppliers of people who would sell me vintage and designer clothing in bulk. So I had enough money to start buying bulk vintage clothing. And then eventually I made a deal in Charleston to open actual like brick and mortar stores. So I had a brick and mortar store in Charleston for a little while. So it kind of snowballed into this like big thing that I became super passionate about, which is like vintage and designer clothing. I just thought it was so exciting. It was like a treasure hunt kind of.
Yeah, that's awesome. And were you already on social media and you had a presence of knowing how to communicate that way? Or was that the impetus for you kind of setting up like an Instagram business focus?
Yeah, I mean, I had an Instagram, but I didn't post on it ever. So I really had no idea how to post, how to price, but it's something you kind of just learned over time. And especially with vintage clothing or just clothing in general, it's not a super difficult sales process. It's like take a picture of the clothing, you measure it, you post it with a caption and a price, and then somebody either tells you they want it or they don't want it. Maybe you negotiate a little bit if like the pricing is bad, right? But yeah, so I'd say that's probably how I got my intro to online business.
I read that in a tweet that you had that some New York City vintage stores charge like 5x a market price, and people are actually more likely to buy it because they think it's an amazing find because the vintage owner has kind of put that in with the price. Is that true?
Yeah, it's super interesting. So I think fashion is one of the most like electric industries to be working in sometimes because of how random consumer behavior is. Like
Mm.
for example, to my point that I put up in the tweet, there are vintage stores in New York City that are selling Levi's, like vintage Levi's for 150, 200, $250 a pair. And you can go on eBay and pay probably $40 to $50 for that exact same pair of vintage Levi's. And the reason people don't do it is not because they don't know it's on there. Like everyone knows eBay exists, everyone knows Depop exists. You can go buy that stuff there. But it's because this vintage store was able to essentially position their store as this highly curated, like we have the best clothing, almost like I would say maybe just like almost high fashion vintage, even if it's just vintage clothing. So they've just done a really good job with brand positioning that allows them to price things for a ton of money. And people buy it almost because it's a ton of money. And I noticed this when I opened my own vintage store. Like the stuff that I was selling for more money got sold far more often than the stuff I sold for less. Like if I got a shirt and I priced it for $100, there's it, at least in my small sample sizing, and at least what I've seen in other vintage stores and people I knew, there's a higher likelihood someone would buy the $100 shirt than if I priced it for 30, because people attributed a higher value to it due to the fact that I priced that item very high. So that was I've only really seen that in like more of the luxury goods industries. I don't think it works in places that are a lot more value attributed. Like I don't think you could pull that one off in like B2B SaaS, for example, but it was
Yeah.
super interesting to see.
That is super interesting. And so where were you when you actually decided I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write Art of the Thrift?
Oh man, that was I was in college. I just finished my first year of college, or I was finishing out my first year of college. And honestly, the only motivation I had is I wanted to write a book. It just seemed like an interesting thing to do and to like have as part of my resume. And so I spent the whole summer writing the book, and I just felt like at this point I had made a fair amount of money, not like a ton, but like enough to where I felt like I had been doing it for longer and more successfully than a lot of people in like kind of like thrifting / resale games. So I was like, okay, I'll write a book, and I published it at the end of the summer. And yeah, so I mean, it was really just I wanted to write a book in short, and so I
What was
decided.
the hardest part about that summer, about actually sitting down and writing a book? Had you been a writer? Like, what was that process like for you?
I had written before for some fashion publications, and I had done a little bit of like creative writing here or there. So I thought I was pretty decent at it, but I'd never written anything nearly as long as a book. The hardest part is just the attention span thing, I think. And consistently sitting down every day and writing a little bit was tough, especially because I was 18 and it was summer and I'd spent the whole year at school. And I was like, I really don't want to be doing this, but I had kind of committed to it. And I was like, if I don't write this right now, there's just zero chance I'm going to do it when school starts up again. Like, there's just no way. And so I, yeah, finished out the book. And then I figured out how to run ads on the book. So like I found out, okay, you can self-publish your books on Amazon because they have this program where you can publish the books. And then you can also run ads on the books where you essentially select keywords and then bids for each keyword, just like any other ad system where you could, put your book at the top of the list for like vintage clothing or secondhand clothing. And so I started running ads on the book when school started up again. And I realized very quickly that I could break even on the ads. Like I wouldn't really make any money doing it, but I was like, okay, well, if I'm breaking even running these ads, I can just hypothetically run ads until I make it on the bestseller list. And so I just got all of my vintage clothing money and I just poured it into ads, just knowing like, okay, I'll get the money back. And I was eventually able to make it to like the 15th spot or something on the small business bestseller lists for the books. And I got good reviews. So it's not like the book was bad, but it definitely was a paid ad marketing campaign. It was not.
Hey, whatever works, whatever works. Okay, so you progress on to start a company called Oatsie. Can you talk about that origin story?
Yeah. So it was around my junior year of college, and all of my friends in school had been getting internships and applying to jobs, and I felt very behind. I wasn't doing any of that. I decided to go on a website called Angel List. I think it's since been renamed to Wellfound, but it was Angel List had a jobs board, and I know it was like I think Angel List's main thing was being a platform for investors to do research on companies and to invest, but they also had a job board where you could find startup jobs. And so I went on the Angel List jobs board and started looking for jobs at startups. I always, again, wanted to be kind of an entrepreneur or at least work at a fast paced company. And so I started looking at startup jobs and I came across this listing for co-founder of Oatsie. This guy had essentially made the app, but he had no idea how to do marketing on it. And I also kind of didn't in the beginning know how to do marketing on it. But I was like, this seems super interesting and I like the app idea. So I'll pitch myself to him and I'll tell him like, this is what I would do if you let me, become a co-founder. And so I approached Jason, my co-founder. He took the meeting. I got on a call with him. I made this big presentation on what I would do with Oatsie if I got the opportunity to be a co-founder. He liked the pitch. And so we ended up working together, and at least part of the plan ended up working. And eventually, I think now Oatsie probably has like 350 to 400,000 users, which is a pretty wild experience to have in college for sure.
Absolutely. So take me through like the steps in that experience. So you're a kid. You have track. You have presumably your education, and then you're also like trying to figure out how to be the CMO of this company. What was the learning curve like?
Yeah, I mean, the first part, which you kind of were alluding to, was the fact that I had no free time, which was tough. So, like, again, I was running D1 track. I was in school. I had, a social life, or trying to have a social life, and then I had to do the CMO thing. And so it was a lot, but we wanted to remain bootstrapped. So we decided never to raise funding. And that was a pretty big decision on our end, but we both were like, we don't want to be tied to investors. We would much rather just do this on our own. And so that really narrowed down our list of options on how we could grow this thing. It's like, okay, we need to be able to grow this app via like network effects of some kind or algorithmically, and we have to do it for essentially free. And so the first thing that we worked on, and this is kind of what I pitched in my slide deck to him, was let's go to all the different blogs, because Oatsie was a calorie counting app, or like essentially like a nutrition tracking app for those who didn't know what it was, but it's a nutrition tracking app. So I was like, okay, let's reach out to every blog online that does nutrition tracking or nutrition based content and reach out to them and say like, hey, we'll pay you this amount of money to honestly review our app. We won't pay you to give us a good review or to glow about us. We'll pay you like $300 or $200 to go on the app and tell us your genuine thoughts and then post on your blog. And so we got a couple of people accepting it, and they posted it, and they gave us great reviews, which was awesome. And a couple of them had like some fair critiques, which were great because it was also product feedback at the same time. And so that got us our first probably few hundred to 1,000 users. Then my co-founder Jason, who was like again the technical person, the one who developed the app, hit me up one day on Slack, and he was like, "Hey, have you looked at this thing called ASO?" And I was like, "No, I don't know what is ASO." And he was like, "Hey, just look it up. Like I think it could be something we try doing." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And so it turns out ASO is essentially SEO for the App Store. So it's the same thing. Like you want to optimize for certain keywords, and the better you do ASO, the higher in the rankings you generally show up. So I was like, okay, if we can somehow find a way to manipulate our app's listing to algorithmically rank higher than every other calorie counter out there, then we can get a bunch of users for free because the App Store has so many people looking up calorie counter. And so we did a bunch of different tweaking and testing of our App Store listing, like changing different keywords, doing different screenshots, and just trying to do anything we possibly could to rank high. And eventually we started ranking really high for this one term, calorie deficit. And we did that by changing the name of our app to Calorie Deficit Calculator. So after we became the first ranked app for the term calorie deficit, we started getting tens of thousands of downloads very quickly. And so that's kind of what caused this massive spike in users. And I don't think ASO works as much anymore. I think it's now a little bit outdated, but at the time it was a very hot topic and it worked pretty well for us.
And so, okay, you then graduate, get out into the world, you have more time to spend on the application. What's the hardest part of getting out of school and kind of figuring out what's next?
Yeah, it was tough. So when I graduated, I immediately moved to New York within like 2 months. And I had no money other than the money I was making from the app, which wasn't a lot. Even though we had a ton of users, we hadn't monetized like incredibly well. We had a paid plan, but like I only owned, a part of the company as a minority percentage, given that my co-founder developed the app. And secondly, I didn't have a job outside of that. So it was like, okay, whatever money is coming in from this is what I have. And so it was very back against the wall moment. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any way to pay rent. And I was kind of just living like off like, dollar pasta, ramen noodles, and living in a very small room in a New York apartment. And so I pretty quickly realized after I moved to New York City that I had maxed out my capabilities for the app. Like there was nothing I could do, it seemed, to get more users at the same incredibly low price of the ASO thing. So yeah, very quickly I was like, I don't think there's much else I can do here. And so eventually stopped working on the app. My co-founder was pretty much on the same page. I mean, he was the one who came to me. He's like, listen, like we're not growing much anymore. And I'm like, super fair. Like we're not, we should probably I should just call it, and stopped working on the app completely. So then I had still the app income because I was still a co-founder, but then I had essentially no job. And that was pretty much the end of the app journey. So it only lasted about 2 years of like work I was really doing on it, and then it stopped.
Okay. So you are moving to NYC, presumably for like a reason. You've done really cool industries so far. You've been in fashion, you've been in nutrition. Where is your heart at this point? What's bringing you to the city and what's it searching for?
Yeah, I mean, the New York City decision was completely vibes based, honestly. Like I went, I visited, and I was like, this place is awesome. Like it's so sick. Everything around here is so cool. There's so much like vibrance and like everything's just like lively. I feel like I'm in the center of everything, and so I just felt like I needed to be there, and I had no reason per se that I wanted to go other than the fact that I felt like I needed to be there. And so luckily, a close friend of mine, Matt, who will probably come up like later in the story, he was like, hey, I'm trying to move to New York City, and I heard you might want to be moving to New York City, because he was like a mutual friend of mine essentially at that point. And I was like, yeah, and we decided to get an apartment together. So there was really no reason. I guess it was just like, man, this place is so sick. I want to be here, and like I'll do whatever I need to do to be here.
I think vibes are an acceptable reason now. It's one of the great things about our present day is vibes are accepted, because it's really the truth of most decisions. Okay, so then you're needing money, or you're living in New York. You decide you're going to spend less time on the application. What happens next?
Yeah. So after I stopped working on the app, I was pretty much like, I thought I really did a really good job, at least in the beginning, of working on the app and getting a bunch of users. Like by the time I left, I think we had probably 300 or maybe like 250,000 users at the time. And the thing that worked was ASO. And I looked around and there were very few ASO consultants or advisors out there. And I felt like, at least at the time, it really felt like a super successful space, or like a place that at least I could find success. And so I started reaching out to a bunch of different startups and pitching my ASO services to them. And I worked with a few different startups who would pay me like very small retainers to just give them ASO advisory, just being like, and I would use this tool called App Tweak. And essentially what I would do is I would go into App Tweak. I would find the keywords for that company's industry that had like the highest, like just a general propensity for being broken into. So like the keywords that had the highest amount of volume and the lowest amount of competition. And then I would advise the company on how to tweak their app listing to become more ASO friendly for that keyword. So there was a bit of a formula to it, and it worked well for certain industries, especially industries where there wasn't like a name brand that people were looking up. So for example, calorie counting, most people don't really know a calorie counting app when they're getting into it. Maybe they've heard of one or two, but like they probably want to browse, right? But on the other hand, everyone knows what Strava is. Like no one's looking up, like at least less people are looking up running calculator. Most people just know what Strava is. They're like, I want Strava, and they're going to go get it. So if I could find apps that were in a space that had a lot of high, let's say like generic keyword search, I could usually do a pretty good job in changing the app listing. So in short, I was hired by those companies, started doing ASO work for them. And yeah, it was working quite well. Like, my clients were pretty happy, and I was making at least enough to like exist in New York City, which was nice.
And are you still running at this time? I think I'm a little ahead, but I know you did eventually sign up for an ultra marathon. So had you carried that on after college?
Yes. So I continued running post collegiately. When I moved to New York City, I was running every day, and I found out that I think it was probably like 8 or 9 months beforehand that the Olympic trials were coming up in 2023 for the 2024 games. And so I set a goal of myself for qualifying for the Olympic trials. And so I was like training ridiculously heavy, like actually more than I was training in college to run a marathon. And so the entire time I was doing this, I was running like 70, 80 miles a week, just in Manhattan, hoping to get the Olympic trials time, which I did not, but I was pretty close, and I wasn't too mad at the result, because the Olympic trials time for me was a massive stretch. It was like, if I can do this, that would be, yeah, like insane. Like, I don't think anybody was like reasonably thinking, okay, he could probably run it, but I at least wanted to give it a shot, and I was pretty happy with the result. So yes, in short, I was running.
Okay. Do you have a favorite running book or running motivation that you use, or content in the running world that you consume?
Funnily enough, I've never been super into the running world or running space.
Mm.
I've just done it. I have like, I mean, my coach, Marcus O'Sullivan at Villanova, was an incredible advisor. He was a 4-time Olympian. He's trained world champions. He's trained world record holder. He has a world record himself. He's like incredibly good. And so most of the advice I got was just from him. And I kind of had the blinders on with regards to his coaching. Like, I didn't listen to anybody but him, and I only listened to what he said. So funnily enough, never really got into it.
Ah, good for you. It's too easy to get all of the extra information going on in your head and confusing you.
Yeah, I think it was a great lesson just for life in general, which was like, you don't actually have to learn too much about the thing you're doing, at least sometimes, prior to just trying it and seeing what works. Like, I'm sure the things that worked for me in running did not work for others at all. Like, I never stretched once. Everyone says you need to stretch before every run, you need to stretch after every run. Never stretch. Does that work for everybody else? Absolutely not. But I found when I stretched, I actually got hurt more. So I was like, I'm just gonna stop stretching. It did better, right? So I think like sometimes it's good to just try things and see if conventional wisdom aligns with the things you're doing or not. And if not,
I think that's very relatable to the startup world. I mean, I remember when I first started this business, I think I wanted to feel productive by listening to all sorts of different podcasts and media and whatever. And all of a sudden you just start hearing two conflicting pieces of advice that would be really good. And I would change direction and think, okay, now I'm doing the right thing. And I finally had to tune it all off. I basically won't listen to startup advice or company stories that are really, really packaged, like unless it's pretty tactical. Like I watch your videos, but I'm not sure, has that made it into your journey today? If we skip out a little bit, just like, what do you consume?
I'm actually very similar to you, where I used to listen to a ton of business podcasts, a ton of business content. And when I started working on this business specifically, I completely stopped. So like I used to listen to like the How I Built This podcast, listen to all these like different founder stories, and I would read all these, like I'd read a couple like founders books, and then I would just watch YouTube videos that were all tailored, algorithmically to me watching entrepreneur content. And I realized the same thing you did, which is like, people are just giving advice from the perspective that they have. And a lot of the time that perspective has shifted, or at least the general alpha in the space that you're operating in has shifted. And so unless I'm watching something that's teaching me the way to do something right now based on, conventional wisdom, I try to avoid it. And so I've actually like purposefully stopped listening to the podcast and watching the videos, kind of similarly to you. And I totally agree with your take there.
Good. That's encouraging for me. All right. So we're back to New York. You're trying to qualify for the Olympic trials. You're getting some money from consulting. The next thing that happens, if I'm reading the chronology correctly, is that you encounter Clay. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So this is where my friend Matt comes back into the story. But my friend and roommate Matt was the original head of marketing at Clay. And so I was running my ASO consultancy business, and I was talking to Matt about how I was planning on expanding out of ASO and doing a lot of SEO work as well, because ASO is a very small space. There were very few major player apps that had the money to give me to advise them on ASO that also had a lot of generic keyword search. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go kind of expand this SEO thing. And I was telling Matt about that, and he was like, at Clay, we're working on some SEO stuff. I bet you could totally contract here if you wanted to. And I was like, absolutely, that sounds great. And he offered me more hourly than I was making from a lot of my retainers. And I was like, this, totally works. I'm pumped to do it. And at the time, Clay was a very small company. They were working out of a Brooklyn apartment. There was like 8 to 10 people on the team at the time, probably. Varun, their co-founder, had just joined probably a few months prior to that. And yeah, I started working at Clay doing a lot of their like SEO work, organic marketing stuff, just building up their website. And it's worth noting, at the time they had like very little revenue, and they pretty much had no product market fit. And ChatGPT had like, I think it was like 3 or 4 months before ChatGPT came out, which I feel like kind of shifted the whole company.
Yeah. And is there a moment for you, whether it's technical moment using Clay yourself or something that an inflection point at the company that clicks with your career arc and you say, okay, this is something that I want to really dive into?
Yeah, it was kind of all happenstance. So Matt showed me Clay before I ever started working there. He was, again, like the head of marketing there. And he was like, dude, this tool could actually really help you with your marketing agency. And so he gave me a quick demo just in our apartment. I'm just sitting there like huddled around his laptop. And he showed me what Clay could do. He's like, you can find people at these companies, you can find their work emails, and you can essentially sequence them in these automated outbound messages. So you don't have to reach out to every company one by one. And at the time, I was going into the Y Combinator directory and one by one finding apps that fit the thing I was looking for and then DMing them. So this was a massive jump. I was like, this is crazy. And so I started using the tool myself, which is, I guess, was kind of my aha moment with Clay. Is like I started sending out messages and at scale using Clay and an automated sequencing tool instantly and getting responses. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, how does nobody know about this? Also, how is this company like allegedly churning through runway right now? Like, this is crazy. Like, how is nobody using this tool? It's crazy. So that was kind of around the time I started using it.
Okay. And when did you realize that you needed to go and actually start the Kiln?
Yeah, it was also a very kind of like happenstance series of events. So I was working at Clay on contracting. And at the time, I was actually still completely planning on opening a vintage store. This was like still very much my dream. I wanted to have a vintage store in New York. And I was just making money at Clay to pay my rent and to keep buying vintage clothing to kind of like stockpile for this store. And I maxed out a couple credit cards at this point on vintage clothing. So I was like very all in on this. I'd committed to it. I'm like, I'm going to get a loan to open the store. I maxed out 2 credit cards. I was like 20 grand in credit card debt just buying vintage clothing. And I was like, not at all thinking to myself, I'm going to start an agency. As a matter of fact, I was going the complete opposite direction. I'm like, I definitely want to get out of this and get into vintage clothing. Around that same time, I was working a lot more at Clay because I needed to make enough money to A, pay off these credit cards, and B, keep paying my rent. So Varun approached me one day and he was like, Varun's like Clay's co-founder for those who don't know. And then he approached me. He was like, hey, like nobody's really running a YouTube for us right now. And also we would like somebody to kind of work more on the LinkedIn that Clay has. And so he's like, could you make a YouTube channel for Clay? And could you like start running Clay's LinkedIn? And I had very little experience in doing this at all. I'd never posted on LinkedIn in my life. And I maybe posted one YouTube video ever. And so I was like, yeah, sure. It's better than nobody doing it. So I'm competing against nobody. I'm hoping I can do better than nobody. Right. So I was like, all right, I can try this. And I started making LinkedIn content for Clay, just showing off the different use cases I built for it. So I'd be like, here's how I use Clay to do this for my marketing agency. Here's how I use Clay to do this. And I was just showing off the tables I built previously to grow my marketing agency, or like, I guess my small one-person marketing shop that I called an agency to make it sound better. So yeah, I started posting it and the YouTube video started getting views, the LinkedIn started getting traction. And yeah, suddenly I had a lot of people coming to me being like, hey, can you do this for me? Like the thing in your video, can you like build this for me? And I was like, no, like I'm doing this vintage clothing thing. I didn't tell them this, but in my back I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. Like I'm doing the vintage clothing thing. Clay's paying me decently. Like I'm just going to keep this path. And then I was talking to Matthew Kwan, who's still on the Clay team and one of the very early Clay employees. And we were chatting and he was like, why don't you just start a Clay agency? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm kind of doing this other thing. I want to open the store. And he was like, dude, these people are making a lot more money than you probably think. He's like, they're making like 200, $300 an hour sometimes just consulting people on Clay. And you're doing it and you're doing it better than them. And you're posting it on Clay's native channels. Like, why don't you start an agency? And so I kind of sat on that for a minute. And I thought to myself, I think a great idea, actually. And so I started reaching out to a few of the people that had reached out to me previously and being like, hey, if you still want that table built, I'll do it for you. And I was just charging like pretty small amounts to get these tables built. And that was kind of the beginning of the Kiln. And I never decided like, okay, this is the thing I'm doing now. It just kept snowballing. Like I kept doing well for a client. And then I'd be like, I'll take half off of your fee if you give me a really good like rating, as long as the job I did was really good. So if I crushed it, you can pay half of what I quoted you just to give me a testimonial. And if I didn't crush it, you're not going to use the table. So it's fine. You got half off it regardless.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. So you serendipitously end up the founder of the Kiln, and then it takes off. Clay takes off, and I was reading one of your tweets that you had to actually hire your first full-time employee. What was it like to I assume, kind of decide, okay, this is the thing now. I'm going to be a leader of people, not just building these rogue myself.
Yeah. So I had been servicing clients for about 6 months by the time I had realized it had kind of snowballed into something that could potentially be big. I never really thought super forward with regards to the work I was doing. I was just like, these companies keep coming to me saying, "Hey, I've seen the videos," and then, offering me money to build tables. And so that to me, it felt like more of a freelance gig, almost like what I was doing with ASO or SEO previously. And then I got to the point where I simply couldn't handle the amount of demand that I was getting for clay work. At the time, there was only maybe 2 to 3 people doing clay work. There was Jordan Crawford, who I think was maybe doing it. Justin Tuwiner. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, or Jacob Tuwiner. Sorry. So Jacob Tuwiner, and that was it. Those are the 2 people doing it. And so there's and clay was starting to pop off. So there's very few people to select from when it came to hiring them. So I got a lot of demand, and that's when I decided, okay, I probably should hire somebody if I want to keep like servicing clients. I didn't want to turn them down. I didn't want to say no. I won't take your money, right? And so I went ahead and went to my friend Matthias. We had been running together at Villanova. We had ran together for 3 out of my 4 years there. He was living in New York, and he was there for only a couple months for the summer before he went back for grad school. And so for the few months that he was, in New York awaiting grad school, I was like, don't go back to school. Don't go back to school. Don't go back to school. Join the Kiln. Like you don't need to go to school. I've got a new thing for you. It's going to be a little risky because we haven't made a ton of money yet, and I don't know where this is going to go. But like I have a lot of demand to immediately service, and I think there could be something here. And so after about a month of like begging him to quit his job that he had gotten and decide not to go and finish out school and join, he joined, and that was kind of where it started really picking up.
That's awesome. Okay, so now I want to talk just a little bit about like the things that you see. I'm curious because clay is such a creative tool. If you have an experience that you've had, whether it be with a customer or whether it be from your time at clay, that you thought, wow, this is just like the most creative thing that I've seen relative to go to market?
Yeah, I would agree. Clay is definitely a super creative tool. It's more of like a coding language, in my opinion, than a conventional sales tool, which is kind of how I pitch to people. It's like it's just going to accelerate your creativity. It's not going to be creative for you. And it's worth noting that before building a table. With that being said, one of the most creative things that I've seen recently was actually from a team member of mine, a conch. So we've been doing this program internally where we have this list of really cool companies that we would like love to work with if given the chance to. These like more enterprise companies that we're super excited about. And we were like, I would love to do clay for them. One of these companies was SEMrush. And SEO tool. And this one, I kind of held a little more near and dear because I used SEMrush so much in my SEO days. And so Akansh, one of my team members, created a custom dashboard in Replit, essentially creating his own little micro SaaS that he was able to connect to Clay via API. And the idea behind this dashboard and the table itself was, what if we could create custom SEO analysis dashboards for every company we are reaching out to automatically at scale? And using Clay's native SEMrush integration, we're able to get all of this super interesting website data, website visitor data, how many people are visiting, from what places, what rankings their keywords are. And we could use that information to feed into the custom dashboard and give it to a prospect. And we're thinking like that's just an obscene amount of value completely for free, just so we can try to sell you on SEMrush. And so the dashboard itself has the company's logo in it. It uses the company's logo colors to create the whole dashboard. And it has all of this really interesting analytical data on their SEO status, which then gets generated automatically and you can send to prospects.
That's amazing. And so then what's the next step with that? So you send that to SEMrush, or you wanted to work with SEMrush because you're then in kind of like a partnership capacity with them, right?
Yeah. So this is more of a prospecting deal. So we just posted it. We didn't even we didn't send it to SEMrush. We literally just posted it. And we're like, if we were SEMrush, this is what we'd be doing for outbound. There's no other outbound play that's more valuable, at least in our mind, than just sending customers their exact SEO data and saying you can improve this by using SEMrush. And so we never ended up working with SEMrush. Now, I want to note that just so people don't think like, oh, I'm saying we signed SEMrush. We didn't. Like, they're still not a client. We just thought it was really cool, and we posted it and being like, hey, SEMrush, look at this. Isn't this cool? And they did think. We did connect with a few of the people on the team. They did think it was super cool, but it's still one of the more impressive things I think we built.
No, I love that. I love that that's happening in this kind of new generation of sales where it's just like starts from value first and you get to see things like that. Okay, so I'm coming up on time. So I want to ask you a couple of going away things. What is a piece of content or a book, and it can't be in the world of go to market now, and I know it won't be in running, that you find yourself recommending to people that you just love?
Yeah. I would say actually one that is running related. Probably the one piece of running content I've ingested over the years is the book called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. I'm sure I mean, at least a lot of people have read Shoe Dog, but it was pretty transformational for me. It had me really thinking about how I can serve clients at scale, which is something, especially in my early entrepreneurial life, I hadn't really considered, which is like if you can create systems to scale out client service in a really let's say like a really thoughtful and exciting way, it can provide dividends. So yeah, I just thought it was a really impactful book. It also, the book is kind of structured so you don't really he's never really happy until the end of the book. And even at the end, he's kind of like, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, which I think is great because it really shows like the true entrepreneurial journey. Like a lot of people on entrepreneur content, they're just like, yeah, I just grinded and I won, and they make it seem it was like overnight. Shoe Dog is really like everything sucked for like 30 years. And then I looked up and Nike was really successful, which I
That's one of my favorite books of all time. So great recommendation. And then my last question is, where are we at with the vintage clothing journey?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much on a pause now. So I actually opened the store that I wanted to open in New York, and this is actually via Clay. So I was talking about how I wanted to open a store to the Clay team at lunch one day, and Puneet, who is their head of brand, I believe, was like, "I have a store space in Brooklyn that I'm not really using for my plant store that I used to run." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah, if you run campaigns for my plant store, I'll give you the vintage space for a couple months." And so I got to open the store, had it for a few months. And while it was a ton of fun and I absolutely loved it, it was not making me nearly enough money to keep open. So it was awesome though. I was able to like fulfill the dream that I had and I feel very content with that. And now I just,
Love that. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for sharing your journey. We'll post links to your LinkedIn and YouTube and X and all that good stuff here in the chat. And I think I'm going to meet you in person here in about a month and a half. So I'm looking forward to that.
yes, sir. And I appreciate you having me on.